Okay, it's recording. So do we want to do it how we've done the last two discussions? Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine. My picture went away. Can y'all see me?
No, we cannot.
Let me see what's going on. Sorry.
I don't mind to type the notes today in the document while
One
you, if you want to talk, Delaney, or if somebody else wants to talk. I just assumed Delaney would talk since she did the last two times.
sounds good. Yeah, that works for me. Okay. All right, I'll just go ahead and read the first question. Andrea, we can't see you, but it's okay. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave and come back in real quick. I'm sorry. I don't know
Okay,
what's going
no,
on.
sounds good. You're good.
Okay, I'm gonna keep working on it, but we can go ahead and get started. I don't know what to say.
Okay, sounds good. Um,
Sorry.
so we are starting with Andrea's questions this time. Maybe we'll get through more, maybe not. We'll see. How does the motivation of teachers to participate in professional development and relearning of history for the integration of social justice education into their classroom vary based on individual teaching philosophies and beliefs? Anybody like to start us out? Let's see. I'm gonna pull up the reading real quick. Andrea, could you like I guess not reword, but kind of elaborate on your question? I think I'm having a difficult time understanding it.
Yeah, so just I kind of thinking about sorry, I'm getting the right um reading. So thinking about like how teachers should be incorporating these six elements into the classroom. I guess I kind of worded it more of kind of in a debatable of like um how are we going to motivate these teachers to do that, and then like through the professional development, and then varying those philosophies within the classroom based on like the six elements. So obviously, as Pecauer says, like this is a hard process and it takes doing all six elements in order to make it effective. How are we going to motivate these teachers to effectively put that process into place and for them to, I guess kind of see the benefit um, of following through with this? Does that make sense? Does that help any?
It does. So I guess kind of you're wondering about the motivation. I think for me, a lot of the upper grades teachers, like third through fifth, I think a lot of teachers have an issue with implementing these types of practices because what are we focused on? We're focused on math and reading, right? And we're focused on testing because whether they say we're held accountable based on our test scores or not, we are. And a lot of teachers want those good test scores. So I feel like we have to move away from that testing phase that we're going through where everything is all about testing and we're not supposed to teach to the test, but we all know that a lot of teachers do teach to the test because they want their kids to do the best that they can. I know even Gwinnett County does we do district assessments for kindergartners and first graders because they want to prepare them to take a test in third grade. And I feel like that discourages a lot of teachers from engaging in these elements because we're not teaching them to think critically about their beliefs and other people's beliefs and how there's injustices in society and what we can do to solve them. We're just teaching them the basics, I feel like, so that they can regurgitate it on a test. So I feel like a big motivation would be a lower emphasis on testing because more teachers would feel creative and able to free up time to teach these elements, if that makes sense.
Do you think that by having those lower emphasis on testing would then lead the teachers to actually doing this, or do you think some teachers would then lead off into their own, I guess, ideas and do their own? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, I guess, like, would it actually lead to them being more culturally inclusive, or would it give them more freedom to not teach?
I think that with professional developments and stuff, I know that they're trying to teach us to be culturally responsive and teaching us all these strategies. I think that there should be some form of accountability as for whether or not we are being culturally responsive. However, there's always going to be those teachers that do the bare minimum. We don't want to think that we don't want to be like that. But there are some teachers who don't go above and beyond, and they do what they have to do to get through the day. And while that's unfortunate, it does exist. Obviously, we try not to be those educators, but I do think that most educators are in it for the right reason, and I do think that most educators want kids to be aware of who they are and who everyone around them who they are, and be respectful of one another. And in the generation that we are raising now in school, I feel like everyone's more socially aware than especially when I was a kid. Like I like racism, all that stuff wasn't really known to me. Like I didn't really understand it. But I feel like it's a lot bigger of an emphasis now. And I feel like most teachers, if they're in it for the right reason, they would be teaching their kids to be respectful of one another and implementing these elements to create students who are able to take social change and actually do something about it. But that's just me, I guess.
Well, and I'll say, like, I feel like social justice education is more like we don't do it as much as far as professional development at our school or in my county, really. Like we take the MAP assessment. And so like a lot of our PLs are centered around all of these tests that we're taking, all these, all the data and everything else. So if you were to take those professional development and take the focus off of, the testing and stuff, then it would create more time for professional development about social justice. But you're also going to have those teachers who I feel like it's more like veteran teachers that are more set in their ways. Like they're not gonna adapt and be willing to incorporate things like this that are more prominent in today's education. If that makes sense.
I think it sounds kind of harsh to say it this way, but going back to what Delaney said, there has to be that expectation. They have an accountability. They have expectations for us when it comes to testing, grades, and all the other things. And we know those, like I said, veteran teachers that don't want to follow through on things, that if there's not some sort of accountability or some sort of you'll be in trouble if you don't do this in place, then they're not going to. So it sounds kind of bad to say, but it's just the same as the kids. Like if there's no repercussions for not following through, then they won't do it, unfortunately.
Right. Well, something you just said that kind of stuck with me was I can understand why veteran teachers don't want to do a lot of the things. Like, for example, I told y'all we're doing EL, which is a new like reading and writing program. And the veteran teachers are like, we don't want to learn this program. There's been so many phases. We've done this program and this program and this program. We get to know it, we get comfortable, and then it's gone. So I feel like if there's a bigger emphasis placed on this, making it stick and it not just being a phase, oh, we need to be culturally responsive for, 5 years, that's our focus. And then, 5 years later, it's something else. I feel like that's the issue with a lot of veteran teachers. They don't want to keep changing. It can be frustrating. Like I know I was frustrated last year with just the changes that I dealt with from last year to this year. So I can understand why they feel that way. But I feel like education is very political, and we are trying to go with whatever the trend is in society at the time. Like that's kind of what we are geared towards in education, I feel like. So making it more of like a foundation rather than, oh, this is just a trend or a phase that we're trying to implement for now would encourage veteran teachers to actually, I don't know, engage in it and not feel like they're wasting their time.
Going off of what y'all said about the veteran teachers, when I first read this question, that was sort of my first thought, that it kind of is how you were brought up, that if you already have these preset set of beliefs, it's going to take you a little more to kind of verge away from that. So, yeah, there's some teachers that are not going to want to implement these new things. And also going off about what Kinsey said, I have never attended any professional development that focuses on anything other than the academics. So again, how can we also learn new things if it's not being taught to us other than going out of our way to do it our own? Um, and a lot of the motivation, I feel like we're students also learning. So I know that students are motivated by relevancy and interest. So I feel like that also applies to us. If it's relevant and we're interested in it, we may also be more geared towards learning new stuff to implement in the classroom.
Wonderful. All right. Did anyone else have anything? Or are we ready for the next question? Okay, awesome. Question 2 says, what are the varying impacts and potential challenges of integrating culturally relevant content and teaching approaches in math education on students' engagement and comprehension of mathematical concepts, specifically in diverse classroom settings?
I'll say I was kind of going off of this too, thinking about like um how it even says in here, no matter what you do when you try to start introducing anything that's cultural, like culturally relevant, I guess you'd say, then you start getting that oh, you're indoctrinating my children problem. And so kind of thinking across that of like how can we what can we do to try to vary those impacts and thinking about those challenges and how, not only just the other teachers, but like the veteran teachers, as you guys mentioned, but like even the parents, because I know that has become such a pushback. Even as a parent of 2 middle school students, I know what they're being presented. And while, for instance, Big Bang Theory, while I'm not necessarily cultural, but still like my 6th grader right now is, he's like, well, Mom, I don't believe in that Big Bang Theory. And I'm like, okay, well, that's fine, but you can still listen to it and be respectful because somebody does believe in that. And so like, while that's not the practice that we have in our house, we still have to be accepting. And so I'm trying to foster that in my children at home. How can we get our parents to also embrace that? And yeah, sorry, I know this is my question, but I just kind of wanted to give you all some background of kind of where I was coming from with that.
I definitely appreciate that because I am having a hard time comprehending questions right now for some reason. It's been a long week. So I think this actually goes back to our discussion that we had. I think it was the first one we had about how much should parents be involved, right? Like we want parents to be involved with their kids, but how much say should they get on the curriculum? Because I know, for example, like at my school, there is a teacher who had a student moved out of her classroom because the kid went home and said that the teacher hurt their feelings, and the parents went up to the school, and without any questions, the kid was moved out of the classroom because that's what the parents wanted. And I do think that parents should have some say, right? But at the end of the day, we we are the professionals who know the curriculum, and we are trying to teach our students, at least me personally, I'm trying to teach my students to be the best human they can be. Like, yes, I'm trying to teach them content, but at the end of the day, I care that they are accepting of others and that they love others and they are welcoming to others, whether they believe in the same things or not. So, how much say should the parents get as to what we actually teach? I know some veteran teachers say, oh, it's my 4 walls. I shut the door. I teach what I teach. Should more teachers stick to that? Because I kind of do. I shut my door and I teach my kids what they need to be taught. But should a parent have the right to go up to the school and say that a teacher is indoctrinating their children by teaching them to be critical thinkers?
So one of the thoughts I had about this when I was looking at the reading was when it talks about having community issues as a framework and how that involvement increases when the out of school problems are included in the lessons. And I started thinking about how if we could show, which I didn't really read the question the way that you explained it, Andrea, so my evidence doesn't necessarily tie in with what you were saying because apparently I'm having trouble comprehending questions as well. But I think it ties in because if we can show the parents that, we're not, it's not like we're trying to push an agenda. It's we care about your kids. We care about this community that we work in and some of us live in, and we care about you as people. Then I think they might be more open to the other aspects of these 6 elements. If we can start with that, that first one, that self-knowledge, and we see you and we love being part of this community and we want to help make it better. And if we can work that into the lessons, then I think that's kind of the place to start with moving forward, that parent acceptance and parent involvement in positive ways in the building.
And I feel like that's just a representation of like how education and the world has changed. Like when I was in school, I was never the winner. I never won. My parents never believed me. They were always like, well, let me go talk to the teacher. Let me talk to, whoever was involved, the adult that was involved. Which I guess just kind of leads to where we're at now and how parents just side with their kids no matter what. I mean, teaching EBD kids for my first 2 years, I know we've talked about that previously, but like it was always my fault or it was the other kids in the classroom's fault. Like they came after me and they came after the other kids. It was never their kid. And I feel like I know that was around when I was in school, but it definitely is growing to where the parents are just on their kids' sides, no questions asked.
Right. So I guess I read the question also a little differently. And some of the impacts that I or challenges that I thought would be possible would be like language differences, as well as diverse backgrounds. So they're going to have different knowledge that they bring into the classroom. And going back to the parents, I think a big way to maybe not fix it, but help would be for parents to actually understand what's being taught and not what they think's being taught because they may be completely different. I know we have to send weekly newsletters to our parents every Tuesday. And one of the requirements is that in those um, newsletters, we have to put our standards that we're teaching that week. And that makes sense, but also I'm like, these are all just a bunch of words. Sometimes I don't even understand the standard. So I'm just like, how are the parents supposed to understand the standard? I mean, I'd rather put it into my words and put what I'm teaching rather than setting the standards because again, half the parents have no idea what the standard even says. Or I have a lot of parents that don't speak English, so I have to go and translate the standards, and some of the academic language makes no sense in Spanish. So I feel like all those tie together, and there may be some misunderstandings, and parents may come upset as well.
And I think that's important, Mariella, like, kind of as I've been reading through, for our other class in the pedagogical reader of like how we are, being inclusive of that, not only the languages, but, the other beliefs and backgrounds and this kind of goes back to all the conversations that we've had every time, but like, I think understanding each student's background helps us better meet those needs. And I guess, how do we break down that barrier of being able to meet those needs? I know in the middle school level, you're teaching, upwards of 75 kids. So how are you getting to know those kids on such a level that you can break down, these potential challenges, specifically to create the diverse classroom setting?
I'm glad I'm in elementary school. I can say that.
Mhm.
I have no idea how you would do that in middle school because obviously to me, like when Kim was talking earlier about teaching the kids to like love themselves and letting them know that they're cared for and like they're important and we understand them and we hear them. all I thought about was relationships, right? Like, and how parents are more accepting because I have a relationship with not only my students, but also their parents. Like, I could call the parents of any of my students right now, and I'm sure they would do anything for me. Like, they trust me and they know that I have their child's best interest in mind and that I love their kid and I care for them and I would do anything for them. So for like if my students go home and say something, their teacher or their parents usually do come to me and ask me. They don't just automatically assume that the child is right. There's maybe one or two parents that do, but for the most part, those relationships have really helped me to establish that ground where the parents trust me and know that I have their child's best interest in mind. But at the middle school level, sounds like a lot of fun calling 75 parents.
Well, I will say I've been on a two-person team for the past 2 years, so I only have like around 32 to 35 kids, which is definitely helpful. I mean, I have to teach two contents, but it's worth it to have fewer kids because I think it's been so much easier to build those relationships, like you were saying. You know, in the past, like when I worked in Gwinnett County, I had 120 students, you know, teaching sixth grade, and it is impossible to do exactly what you said, Andrea, which is develop those relationships and know each student's cultural background or religious background or anything about them. You know, you get the ones who are not shy and willing to talk to you. That's easier to do. But when you have those kids, and there's just so many of them, it's incredibly difficult. So I'm very thankful to only have, I think I have like 34 students right now, and it's amazing.
All right, I will go ahead and read the next question. It says, aside from language barriers, a misalignment among cultural expectations, practices, and home knowledge was cited as a reason for poor academic performance among students whose first language is not English. What do you do in your classroom to bridge language differences? I'll just go ahead and say something really quickly. So I have a student who only speaks Spanish, and like I took Spanish for 8 years or 7 or 8 years in high school and college. So I'm pretty familiar with the language, but I haven't spoken it in a while, like fluently. So it's a little uncomfortable for me to speak Spanish because it's not my native language, you know, and I don't use it every day. But I have done everything that I can to speak Spanish to this child. Like I have one kid in my class who's another ESOL student, and she isn't like super proficient in English, but she understands enough so that she can help communicate between the two of us. It's helped build a relationship between them two. It's helped build a relationship between me and both of the students. And even like as far as building those relationships, you know, at the beginning of the year, I had no idea how I was going to build a relationship with a child who couldn't understand me. And as the year like progressed and kept going on, I realized that just giving her a voice made it 10 times better for her. Like we would do morning meetings and everyone would share, but she couldn't because she couldn't speak English. So I started having the other kid listen to her and translate to the rest of the class what she said. And it just uplifted her entire spirit. Like she started trying 10 times harder. She would answer in her native language, and then we would translate it to make it fit English language so that I could help her the best I could. And I grouped those two students together because they're about on the same level academically, but one knows English and one doesn't. So it's worked out really well for me that I've been able to group them together and include them in a way that they still feel like they're a part of the whole class. Because I feel like at the beginning of the year that child felt singled out and her academics were severely struggling because of it. But now I do small group with just those two girls and we communicate back and forth, and the girl's finally getting it. She's getting math, she's getting reading, and it's just amazing to see. So that's just something that I've done this year. Because I've never had ESOL students. I've always had majority African American students. So I never struggled with the language barrier until this year, and it's really interesting to me.
So I'll just kind of piggyback. As I've shared in the past, I was in middle school and now I'm in pre-K. So, but a lot of my students are either nonverbal or are like delayed, cognitively and communication wise. And so one thing that I have actually picked up with our speech therapist is kind of using that
I guess, multilingual is how I can't say it. To help communicate with my students. I have one who he speaks, both Spanish and English, and even the parents say that he doesn't completely understand everything in Spanish, and so that's where we're working. But like the direct things that I need him to do, like sitting down or eating and those sorts of things, I use in both Spanish and English, because then I know he's still connecting those, because I don't want him to lose that first language that he uses in his home. And that is something that communicating that with the parents has helped with them seeing that I'm trying to foster that in the classroom as well. And I think, that kind of goes along with kind of what you were saying, Delaney, about, helping them feel a part. And so when he sees, or when he hears me speak Spanish and then followed by English, he realizes, oh, she gets me, kind of thing, even though he's 4. And same thing with the parents, when I communicate that with them, that they realize I'm not trying to push out their culture and their background from home. And so I think that has definitely helped.
And I just had a meeting the other day with the NTSS committee of our school, but we were just talking kind of about how we were overqualifying SPED kids, but they were like dual, they were EL and they were SPED, and we were overqualifying them in our county because we were identifying them as having, special needs as far as like specific learning disability or whatever it may be, when really in reality, it was just that language barrier is what was hindering them academically. And so they were talking about how the protocols have now changed, of course, but they were talking about how they aren't doing any RTI for any EL students in the first early years, so K through 2nd, in order to give them more time with the EL teachers, compared to pushing them through the RTI process so that they'll get SPED services. So I thought that was kind of cool. Kind of cool that they were kind of recognizing that, hey, this is kind of why this is an issue, why we're overqualifying these EL kids for SPED. And that question kind of made me think about it as well. One thing we do a lot is we use visuals for our students with that speak solely Spanish. Visuals and Google Translate a lot. And we have like 2 teachers in the building that speak Spanish, so we use them as well. But we also use the peers. We have one kid that refuses to come into the building, and so he'll lay in the hallway and he speaks no English. And so we'll use different kids that do speak English to try to like convince him to get up and go to class. But the peers are definitely help create a more inclusive environment. So that's just kind of what I was thinking while all y'all were talking.
It was really interesting to hear all y'all's answer. I'm a native Spanish speaker, so I always wanted to teach at a school with Hispanic students. That's just what I wanted to do, and I ended up in a school that is predominantly Hispanic/Latino. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm set to go. If they speak Spanish, I already know how to communicate with them. Well, when I started last year, I was thrown for a loop because I had a lot of students that were Latino but didn't speak Spanish. They were from Guatemala, so they spoke a Mayan language. And I came to the issue of, well, I know Spanish, but that's not helping them because they don't speak that language at home. And I came to the struggle that whenever I would reach out to either academic coach or administration about getting additional help, they would tell me, well, just speak to them in Spanish. And I had to make them understand, like, that's not going to help them. They don't speak Spanish. They speak another language. Some of them spoke very, very minimal words in Spanish, but most of their language came in. They came in talking their Mayan language as well as the parents. So I had that struggle of, how can I communicate with your parents when I don't speak a language that they speak? So it was really interesting just to hear y'all's conversation.
All right, I will go ahead and read the next question. In element 1, sorry, In Element 1, teachers provide students opportunities to learn about who they are and where they come from. A sense of pride in their culture, classroom, and their racial or ethnic identity, and some of the historical background about their group. Element 1 naturally opens the door to include family members in their curriculum. What are some ways in which teachers can implement Element 1 in the elementary classroom? How does one involve families?
So I kind of liked the idea of using the paint strips or paint samples, I guess, with a variety of skin shades and having students find their match. That just, I don't know, it really kind of hit me, I think, too, thinking about my littles that I have, and then thinking about even back to the middle school age, and how you could really use that at any level to help them, I guess, just find who they are. And then maybe not bringing in things to show and tell for the middle grades, but then again, maybe finding books that have, characters that meet, meet their characteristics and that sort of thing. But the biggest thing actually in that paragraph for Element 1 that stood out to me was that units like this don't need extra time. They can be integrated. And I think that that's what is so big, kind of going back to what I was saying earlier in my question, is getting these teachers to realize that we're not creating something new, or maybe we are creating something new, but we're integrating it. So we're not starting over fresh. We are adding to it. And I think that that's the biggest thing with that. Yeah, and I just like the paint sample and how they could actually include their family into that, and maybe even finding paint samples for all their family members and kind of creating their family from that. I don't know, just an idea.
One thing that we read that I thought was interesting, I can't remember what reading it was, to be honest, but it talked about how white students felt like they didn't have a culture. And as someone who's white, I can understand that, because I remember going through school and us talking about culture and, having cultural day and celebrations, and like white culture was never celebrated per se. And I think just educating students, because this is the first year that I've had like an actual diverse classroom with a little bit of everyone. It's really interesting because I've noticed this in my own classroom where we talk about things from their culture or their background, and my white students are kind of left speechless. Like they're like, oh, there's nothing special. There's no holidays. They think it's all mainstream, which kind of goes back into them being the dominant perspective, that being what's normal to them. But educating them that everyone has a culture, everyone has a background, and that everyone should have pride in who they are was a huge thing to me. But I will say, like, when it comes to integration, I like to integrate like Black History Month in with our social studies units. I was telling y'all about that last time, about how we teach about Rosa Parks and Ruby Bridges and all that. And that was great for my students last year, because as a majority African American, they were able to gain pride in their own race and their own background, and they adored it. But I feel that it's a lot easier to implement elements 1 and 2 and 3, but how do you integrate a social change project? When is there time to, like, I love integration, I think it's great, but when is there time for students to solely focus on a social issue and finding it, like, a way to solve it, like a solution, a way to help? Because I feel like there's not enough time in the day ever to do all the stuff that we're already doing, and I try to integrate as much as I can, but I don't know how to get it to the point where kids can really focus on taking action. If that makes sense.
And I think
So-
that goes back, Delaney, to not focusing on testing so much. But that's here nor there at this point.
I wanted to ask you guys, because I don't know at the elementary school level if you see this or not, but this is my first year in a while that I've taught ESOL kids. And so I have a very culturally diverse group in one of my classes. And they're just, not all of them, but a majority of them seem embarrassed about their cultural differences. Like, and not just like there's just doesn't seem to be any pride, and like they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to single out any differences. They just want to be part of the group and we're just like everybody else. And like I don't want to tell you where my family's from, or sometimes they don't even know. Like if, I'll say, let's say like, where's your family from? And they say Mexico. I'm like, oh, what part of Mexico? And like they have no clue. And it just seems kind of shocking to me. Like I desperately, like I would love to be able to do like all of these elements in my classroom, and I teach social studies, so when I get to like the civil rights unit and stuff, it would be easier for me to do some sort of social, like activist kind of project. But it's just kind of hard to get my kids on board and to get them like passionate about something like that. And I kind of mentioned this in one of my questions that I answered, is like, I don't know, do we even still see that these kids have pride in their culture? Or one of the quotes said, like, there's this natural empathy of children. And I'm like, I also don't see that really a lot with my kids. They're not naturally empathetic. Everything becomes a joke, and they don't appreciate or value their cultural differences and stuff. So this has been kind of something I was thinking about the whole time I was reading both of these passages.
So there's three things that talk about what you just talked about, but they're like kind of off the wall. But you were talking about how like students don't have pride and stuff. I kind of felt that same way. But then today I actually had a kid, we were talking about South America, or I don't know, we were talking about one of the continents, I can't remember. And one of my kids goes, that's where my ancestors are from. And they were so proud of it. But like my kids last year, they were so afraid of it. They were afraid to talk about it. And most of them aren't empathetic towards one another, especially the younger grades, pre-K, kindergarten, first. Kids, I feel like, have a somewhat difficult time understanding others' perspectives, why they might not think the same way or feel the same way, or why they're not the same as they are. So like, for example, my kids, I always have to be like, I have to make them explain to somebody why they feel the way they feel. Like, can you tell them what you told me, that they hurt your feelings or they made you cry, whatever it is. And the kids will tell them. And then I'm like, well, do you understand why they would be upset? Do you understand why that would hurt their feelings? And it's hard for them to understand that. So I feel like empathy is really difficult for a lot of kids. And obviously we don't like, it would be great to think in theory that kids are naturally empathetic. And I think that some might be, but I also feel that a lot are not. A lot of people, and it could go back to parenting. I don't know. I'm not a parent, but I feel like if it's not modeled in the home, it's probably not going to happen in the classroom either. Because a lot of these kids that I'm constantly having to have conversations with about not being empathetic and making fun of other people, their parents kind of seem the same way. And I hate that, but I feel like it definitely has to start in the home. But also, this one's kind of random, but you're talking about like how we want to honor the cultural differences and stuff. I feel that a lot of teachers approach it in the wrong way. Like, for example, say there's one kid in my class. Like last year, I had one white kid in my class, only one, and the rest were African American. And we were teaching about slavery at the time. And a teacher next door to me pointed out one kid in her class who was white and asked for their perspective on it. While everyone else in the class was African American and they felt singled out. The kid was in first grade and cried because they felt singled out. They were the only one who was asked about their perspective. And I feel like a lot of teachers think that that's giving them a voice and that's making them feel like they're included, or like we care about their perspective. But I don't want to be singled out. Our kids don't want to be singled out. And I think that teachers need to really step back and think about the way they are trying to be culturally responsive and deciding whether or not it is actually harming the kids or if it's helping them. Because I think a lot of the practices that are happening in the general education classroom, the special education classroom, wherever, a lot of them are harming the kids, whether we mean to or not. And I think we just have to step back and really think about what we say before we say it. And I know it's hard because we make a lot of decisions throughout the day, but it could be more harmful than it is beneficial at times.
I'm kind of going off of, I'm not a parent either, but going off of the whole pride, a sense of pride in their culture, I feel like a lot of that starts in the home. Like if the parents take pride in their culture, then the kids are going to take pride in their culture. I mean, I had a kid who she was Puerto Rican. She was not Hispanic, she was Puerto Rican. And if you said anything else, or someone, a student or something said something to her, she would correct them like that. And that's because her parents and her grandmother, like they all took pride in where they were from. And so that carried over into school. And she'd tell you all about Puerto Rico. She'd been on vacation there a couple of times, and that was because her parents had taken her back to see family and stuff like that. But then also another piece, another side of that, is I feel like a lot of parents of like our English language learners, a lot of them are embarrassed, which I then also think carries over into the kids being kind of embarrassed at school as well. Like we have a parent who they moved from New York, so they just moved here. But she doesn't have transportation, she doesn't have a job, she doesn't have insurance, like she doesn't have all the things. And like we were trying to get her resources, and she just like didn't want to talk to us about it really. And then her kid, like he was in a school in New York that was like dual immersion, so it was like Spanish and English, so he was getting special education services in Spanish, and I was like, we don't have that here. I don't speak Spanish. So I was like, I don't know if you want me to, like, I can try to figure something else out. Like, there are schools around here that have some Spanish speaking classes if we want to look into that. And she was like, no, I don't want him to be served in Spanish. I want him to be served in English. And so I was like, that kind of was a different perspective, because she was kind of like not shunning her culture, but kind of like, no, I want him to kind of just learn English. Like, we don't speak Spanish at home. I don't want him served in Spanish. So I thought that was interesting as well.
I do feel like the parents have a large impact on how the students act about their culture. But I think the school environment also has a big effect on it. I know that the past week, we did a show and tell for a Hispanic Heritage Month, but we wanted all parents to send in something that um, was cultural to them and send like a little note, because we're in kindergarten, so the students aren't going to know much of what to say. And I had 3 students bring in something out of 19, so I wish there would have been more, but it's okay. And I did have one student who brought in a special clothing item from Mexico. And he was super, super, super excited about it when he came in the classroom in the morning. He showed me, Zavala, look, my mom told me to send you this. And his mom sent in like a little note. Um, he was super excited. Then when it came time to do the actual show and tell program, um, one student started kind of laughing about his clothing item because he put it on him, and it's meant to look bigger on the individual. So of course, the clothing item was a little big on him. Um, and the other student was completely laughing about it, and I had to have a conversation with him. So that kind of made that student kind of upset about it. And he said, like, I wish I hadn't put that on anymore. So I think a lot of the culture pride can come from the parents, but it can also come from the experiences that the student may have at the school or with the other peers. Because if they hang out with people that are, not embarrassed or embarrassed per se about their culture, they're not going to feel different. They're going to go with what their friends or how their friends are acting.
All right. Well, we can only go to 45 minutes, and I know we started a few minutes later, but I don't think we have enough time to get into the next question. Do y'all agree, or do y'all want to go for it? Or do y'all just want to end here?
I think we can end it, Control. I mean, we could keep going, but she doesn't want us to go.
I mean, I think the other questions are talking about like, how do you feel like you incorporate culturally responsive? I mean, I think we've kind of hit on some of these other things, talking about empathy being post-pandemic, which I think we have all noticed that. So, I mean, I'm okay with stopping. I know we've kind of hit on all those. Yeah.
That's fine with me.
I will stop the